In the Victorian era, where luxurious mansions dotted the verdant meadows, there lived a poor girl named Eleanor with her grandmother in an old cottage near the forest. Eleanor was a delicate beauty, with clear skin and eyes that shone like moonlight. Despite her poverty, she possessed a bright spirit and natural beauty that captivated all who saw her. On the other side of this tale was a noble prince named Alexander, a handsome young man of reserved demeanor, burdened with an ancient curse that had plagued his family for generations. This curse was tied to dark magical forces, shadowing him and influencing his life in inexplicable ways. One stormy night, after a heated argument with his father, the king, Prince Alexander decided to embark on a journey far from the castle to clear his mind and ponder the curse that weighed heavily on his soul. He mounted his horse and rode through the dark forest. But fate had other plans. His horse suddenly stumbled over the massive roots of an ancient tree hidden among the dense underbrush, and Alexander was violently thrown to the ground. He sustained a severe head injury and lost consciousness. The next morning, while Eleanor was gathering firewood near her cottage, she saw a motionless body lying on the ground. She hurried over, finding a handsome young man covered in blood and unconscious. Without hesitation, she rushed to his side and did everything she could to save his life. She brought him to the cottage, where she and her grandmother began to tend to his wounds. Alexander awoke after several days, only to find himself suffering from complete amnesia. He did not know who he was or how he had come to be in this place. He had no recollection of his identity, only an instinct for survival and an inexplicable desire to continue living. Eleanor named him Jonathan, and he began working with her and her grandmother in the cottage. He chopped wood, fetched water, and helped with simple household chores. As days turned into weeks, a deep friendship blossomed between Jonathan and Eleanor. He found comfort and tranquility in her company, and she saw him as a brave and kind man. Little did she know that this man was actually a prince, pursued by a dark curse in silence. But things did not remain calm. Eleanor started noticing strange occurrences around her. Objects moved without reason, mysterious whispers filled the night, and an unnatural cold sometimes engulfed the place. She had no idea that the curse following Jonathan was gradually revealing itself, making matters more complicated and dangerous. How will Eleanor's relationship with Jonathan develop? Will she be able to uncover his true identity and the secret of the curse haunting him? And can love triumph over the darkness that surrounds this lost prince? After several weeks of Jonathan's stay at the cottage, the situation grew more mysterious and perilous. Eleanor felt increasingly anxious about the strange events happening around her, as if something supernatural was starting to encircle her life. The closer she got to Jonathan, the more she sensed a strange cold coursing through her veins, and mysterious whispers echoed around the cottage at night. Eleanor could no longer bear the anxiety, so she decided to visit a wise, old woman she knew in the village. This old woman was named Marian, renowned for her wisdom and extensive knowledge of ancient secrets and curses. When Eleanor arrived at Marian's home, the old woman welcomed her with warmth and affection. Eleanor sat before Marian and began to recount everything that was happening with her and Jonathan, how he had lost his memory and was living with her and her grandmother in the cottage. When she finished her story, Marian looked at her with sharp eyes and began to speak in a deep, cautious voice. Eleanor, the young man you are sheltering is not an ordinary man. He is the last of an ancient lineage that stretches back centuries. An old curse was cast by his great-grandfather's wife when they discovered she was an evil witch. She wanted the heir to the throne to be from her lineage, and when her true nature was revealed, she was burned alive. But before she died, she unleashed a devastating curse on the family. She cursed them that every young man born into this family would die upon reaching the age of 25. Marian continued with a more serious tone. Since then, every young man born into this family has died for no apparent reason upon reaching his 25th birthday. And now, the prince you are sheltering, yes, he is the crown prince, is approaching this age. That is why disasters have begun to befall him. This curse is haunting him, and it will not leave him until it takes his life. Eleanor shivered upon hearing this, unable to hide her fear and worry. But Marian continued to advise her. Eleanor, keeping him with you in the cottage will bring great trouble to you and your grandmother. If he dies here, you will be in danger. He must return to his family. They are the only ones who can attempt to break this curse, if that is even possible. But Eleanor, despite understanding the danger, could not bear the thought of Jonathan leaving. She had become deeply attached to him and felt something beyond friendship. She feared he would forget her existence as soon as he returned to the kingdom, disappearing from her life forever. She could not imagine her life without him. Thus, Eleanor decided to remain silent and not reveal to Jonathan what she had heard. Yet, deep down, she knew time was passing, and things could take a dangerous turn soon. How would she handle this situation? Would she be able to protect Jonathan from the curse that haunted him? Or would fate force her to make a painful decision? As days went by, Jonathan began to wither slowly. Each day, he lost a bit of his strength, and his enigmatic eyes gradually lost their sparkle. Darkness surrounded him like a heavy shadow, as if the curse was taking something from him bit by bit. Eleanor felt an overwhelming sense of helplessness each time she got close to him, as if an unseen fire was burning her, filling her with terror and dread. She couldn't bear to watch him drown in this dark mire, and she desperately wanted to save him. But how? Eleanor tried everything conceivable. She began searching for any solution, any thread that could lead her to healing Jonathan. She roamed the neighboring villages, asked doctors and wise men, and visited anyone with knowledge of ancient magic and curses. But to no avail. The answers were always the same. This is a powerful curse. It cannot be broken easily. Every time she returned to the cottage, she saw Jonathan growing weaker, as if life was gradually draining from him. She watched him attempt to maintain his daily routine, helping her with household chores as much as he could, but she could see the pain in his eyes, feel it in his racing heartbeat. Eleanor couldn't bear to see Jonathan fading before her eyes. She knew that time was running out, and she needed a miracle to save him. But in a world ruled by magic and ancient curses, finding a solution seemed next to impossible. Nevertheless, Eleanor did not give up. Her determination and resolve to break the curse and save Jonathan only grew stronger, even if it cost her everything she had. After days of mounting despair, Eleanor found herself returning to the wise old Marian, who knew secrets deeper than Eleanor could imagine. When she arrived at Marian's cottage, Eleanor's tears flowed freely. The old woman looked at her with compassionate eyes, fully understanding that the love filling Eleanor's heart would drive her to do anything to save Jonathan. Marian hesitated at first, aware of the danger of the solution, but faced with Eleanor's insistence and flowing tears, she decided to reveal the horrifying truth. Eleanor sat before Marian, and the old woman began to unveil the secret. My child, breaking the curse is possible, but it requires a great sacrifice, and the sacrifice must come from a girl who loves the prince deeply. Your heart, Eleanor. Eleanor froze, unable to grasp what Marian had said immediately. She asked with a trembling voice, how can I sacrifice my heart? Marian looked at Eleanor with sorrowful eyes and continued, you must go to the cave of darkness, the place ruled by the great ghoul, that dreadful beast that gains power by devouring the hearts of loving maidens. There, you must adorn yourself as a bride and throw yourself before the ghoul, declaring that you offer your heart as a tribute. so that the curse on the prince can be broken. Words froze in Eleanor's mouth. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. How could she accept such a fate? How could she offer her heart to a terrifying monster to save Jonathan from a deadly curse? She felt panic, but at the same time, she realized that her love for the prince was greater than any fear. Marian continued, "The great ghoul is the master of all dark magic spread across this land. If you do not make this sacrifice, there will be no escape for the prince. He will surely die on his 25th birthday, and he will no longer be the heir. This is the harsh truth." Eleanor took a deep breath, trying to comprehend what she had just heard. She knew that the decision before her would be the hardest of her life, but her love for the prince was so strong that she couldn't imagine living without him. Now, she had to choose. Would she sacrifice herself to save Jonathan and give him life, or leave him to his inevitable fate? Time was passing quickly, and each moment brought Jonathan closer to his dark end. Eleanor understood that the decision she had to make would change both their lives forever. After long nights of contemplation and inner struggles, Eleanor finally decided what she had to do. On a bright morning, she approached Jonathan, who was sitting outside the cottage, quietly contemplating nature. As she drew near, her eyes held a strange sparkle, a mixture of sadness and resolve. She looked at him steadily and said in a determined voice, "I have a request for you, Jonathan." The prince smiled. He felt joy whenever she spoke to him, but he wasn't prepared for what he was about to hear next. "I want you to marry me, Jonathan." Time stopped for him. He couldn't believe what he had heard. This marriage proposal was the happiest news he had ever received. He loved Eleanor passionately, but he had never dared to express his feelings for fear they were unrequited. His heart almost leapt out of his chest with joy, but at the same time, a part of him was afraid that what was happening was just a dream, or that there was another reason behind her request. But he could not resist his feelings, so he agreed quickly and without hesitation. "Yes, Eleanor, I will. I will with all my heart." Jonathan did not know that Eleanor wanted to live her last days with him, and that her decision to marry him was part of her plan to save him from the curse slowly encroaching upon him. In that poor village, a simple but deeply meaningful wedding ceremony took place. The villagers gathered to see the handsome prince and the poor girl marry in a celebration overflowing with love and devotion. Eleanor wore a simple white wedding dress, yet her beauty radiated from within, and her eyes sparkled with tears as she looked at Jonathan with a love he had never known before. Everyone was happy, and Jonathan felt as though he were living in a beautiful dream. But he did not know that Eleanor was hiding a dark secret, and that this marriage was the beginning of the end for her. She had chosen to sacrifice herself for him, deciding to spend her last days living happily with him before facing her inevitable fate. Eleanor had just spent the most beautiful week of her life with Jonathan, filled with happiness and mutual love. She thought that his curse had been lifted. His face regained its glow. He was tender with her, and she had never felt such joy in her life. Their laughter filled the corners of the forest with happiness, making them feel that every creature was sharing in their joy. She felt she was overcoming the magic with just love, but in the midst of this overwhelming happiness, the day Eleanor had feared arrived. On a quiet evening, the wise old woman Marianne knocked on the cabin door. Her face was a mix of fear, sadness, and caution. She looked at Eleanor and the smile that adorned her lips, feeling the pain of seeing that radiant smile disappear forever. With a pained voice, she told her that the time had come. Marianne said, "My dear Eleanor, time is running out. Your departure will be at the full moon because the ghoul will enter his slumber for another year, and by then, it will be too late for the prince." Eleanor felt a deep wound and strong pain in the depths of her heart, and she knew that the end was near. Every moment she spent with Jonathan was taking her further away from the harsh fate, but those moments had come to an end. With hopeful eyes, she asked old Marianne, "Is there no other way? No hope? Anything? How can I leave him alone and sad? How will he live without me? I'm not afraid for myself, because I will not suffer long in my death. But what will happen to him? It hurts me to be the cause of his misery. My conscience blames me for marrying him. I should not have made him happy for a week, just to destroy him forever. How selfish I was." Eleanor looked at the old woman Marianne, her eyes filled with tears, seeking a glimmer of hope or a chance to change her fate. But Marianne gently placed her hand on her shoulder and said with a mix of tenderness and firmness, "My daughter, this is your destiny, and you have embraced it with courage. You chose your path with your free will, and now you must complete what you started before it is too late." Eleanor felt the weight of Marianne's words, as if she was bearing mountains on her shoulders. She realized that the time had come to fully accept her fate and sacrifice for the man she loved. There was no room for hesitation, as every moment of delay could mean Jonathan's downfall. She nodded her head with determination, wiped her tears, and took a deep breath, saying in a voice full of resolve, "I will do it, Marianne. I will do what I must to save Jonathan, even if it means sacrificing my life." Marianne smiled with satisfaction, knowing she had prepared Eleanor for this difficult decision. She warned her one last time, "Be strong, Eleanor. The night of the full moon will come soon, and you must be ready to face the ghoul in the cave of darkness. Remember, this path may seem dark and frightening, but you will succeed because your heart is filled with true love." Eleanor began preparing for her final journey, aware that time was passing quickly and that the night when she would sacrifice herself was approaching. She lived every moment with Jonathan as if it were the last, hiding her sadness behind a serene smile, trying to leave him the most beautiful memories even after her departure. In the early hours of dawn, Eleanor sat next to her husband, Jonathan, who was sleeping peacefully. She gazed at his serene face, wishing time would freeze at that moment, but she knew she had to leave before he woke up. With extreme caution, she touched his cheek warmly, trying to imprint his features in her memory. But suddenly, Jonathan grabbed her hand, as if sensing her even in his sleep. Eleanor felt her heart clench and panicked, fearing he would wake and see her. She tried to gently pull away, but his grip was firm, as if preventing her from leaving. Her eyes filled with tears, and it became difficult for her to control her emotions. She had loved Jonathan with all her being, and the thought of leaving him tore her apart. She whispered to herself in a barely audible voice, "I'm sorry, my love, but this is the only way to save you." After moments of internal struggle, she managed to gently withdraw her hand and quietly retreated from the room, leaving her heart and soul with Jonathan. She began her journey toward the cave of darkness, where she would make the ultimate sacrifice to save the man she loved more than anything else. Eleanor quietly left the cottage, wearing her white wedding dress adorned with flowers, which she had carefully chosen for her wedding day. The blooming flowers on the dress added an innocent and beautiful touch, but it was also a symbol of her tragic fate. She walked with steady steps toward her destiny, heading for the cave of darkness where the ghoul awaited her. Her heart was heavy with sorrow, but she was determined to make her sacrifice in the name of love. She did not know what would happen to her after she offered her heart to the ghoul, but all that mattered to her was breaking the curse and saving Jonathan. Every step she took toward the cave felt like the weight of separation. Every flower on her dress told the story of their short but passionate and faithful love. She no longer thought of herself. Her thoughts were entirely focused on Jonathan and how to save his life, even if it meant sacrificing her own. Eleanor walked deeper into the cave with trembling steps, frightened and terrified, her heart almost stopping its beating. The dark walls of the cave wrapped around her like a cold embrace, and each step echoed her fear. As she drew closer to the cave's interior, her heartbeat grew stronger. When she arrived at the large cavern hall, she was shocked by the sight. The ogre, a massive creature, sat on a golden throne, surrounded by darkness. The ogre held a scepter adorned with the heads of virgins, mementos of his previous victims. In that moment, Eleanor saw how the ogre was the source of terror that caused so much pain, and how horrifying he truly was. She approached the throne with hesitant steps, and in that moment, she was filled with the strength and courage brought about by her deep love for Jonathan. She threw herself to the ground before the ogre and did what she had to do. She spoke with a trembling, yet determined voice. "O ogre, I am here to offer you my heart as a sacrifice to break the curse that haunts my beloved Jonathan. Please grant him life and return him to the light." The ogre looked at her with eyes full of malice, slowly listening to her offer. He took a moment to think, then rose from his throne and approached her. He roared in a deep and frightening voice, "Why do you give up your life for someone else?" Eleanor bravely answered despite her fear, "Because my love for him is greater than anything else. I want to see him happy, and I want to break this curse so that no one else suffers as he has." The ogre looked intently at Eleanor, as if assessing the strength of her will and the sincerity of her feelings. After moments of tense silence, he approached her and said in a low voice, "If your heart is true, your sacrifice will be enough." With these words, Eleanor prepared for the end. She was determined to give everything she had for love, even if it meant eternal farewell. The ogre approached Eleanor calmly, held her chin, scrutinizing her features carefully, as if searching the depths of her soul. Her eyes sparkled with a sincere love that the ogre had never seen before. Her eyes reflected passion and purity, unlike all the girls who had come to him crying, their hearts filled with fear and compulsion. His stance towards Eleanor was entirely different. There was something unusual, something that made him pause. He slowly raised his hand, trying to pull out her heart with his long claws, but suddenly he stopped. The moment was strange, and Eleanor did not understand why he stopped. Even the ogre himself could not explain what was happening. Slowly, the ogre lowered his hands to his sides and looked at Eleanor with unexpected compassion. She took his hand and helped him stand, and in a deep and emotional voice he said, "I will not take your heart. Instead, I will break the curse on the prince. But there is one condition." Eleanor was surprised, her eyes full of questions and hope. She asked, "What is the condition?" The ogre replied seriously, "I will break the curse, but you must stay with me in the cave for a full year, caring for me during my slumber. This condition has not been asked of any girl before, but you are the only one who came to me of your own free will and with true love." Eleanor felt inner turmoil, realizing that this request would be a great challenge. However, she looked at Jonathan and remembered her great love for him and how willing she was to sacrifice for him. She replied with strong resolve, "I will stay with you in the cave, caring for you, as long as it fulfills the hope of saving my beloved." The ogre smiled, a mix of satisfaction and appreciation in his eyes. "Then, I promise you that I will break the curse, and the way will be open for you to return to your beloved after the end of the year." Thus, Eleanor began her journey in the cave, hoping to sacrifice everything for a love that was stronger than any curse, driven by the courage and altruism that led her to that fateful moment. Jonathan awoke in the cabin, surrounded by darkness and silence. His soul felt anxious and confused as he noticed Eleanor's absence. He began searching for her eagerly, roaming the cabin and the village, asking everyone about her whereabouts. Even his grandmother had no news of her, which heightened his worry and sent him into a panic. Everyone started looking for her, but their efforts were in vain. As night fell, Jonathan did not cease his search, losing hope of finding her. In a state of tension and exhaustion, he stumbled and fell from a nearby cliff, losing consciousness. When he awoke, he found himself lying on a lavish bed inside his palace. The palace was bustling with activity, and everyone was gathered around him, happy to see him return after believing he was dead. Their faces expressed relief and joy at his return to life. Suddenly, Jonathan remembered that he was Prince Alexander, back to the life of kingdoms and royalty, but something strange had happened. He had no memory of Eleanor. It was as if she had never been in his life, like a dream that had faded away. He remembered nothing of that time, as if he had suddenly awakened from a long sleep, leaving those memories behind. Meanwhile, Eleanor remained in the cave with the ogre, and days passed as she fulfilled her role in caring for the ogre during his slumber. Despite the initial fear and anxiety, their relationship developed in an unexpected way. The ogre began to feel unusual emotions towards Eleanor, as if she were his daughter. The bond evolved into one filled with love and care. The ogre's behavior changed, becoming gentler and more tender towards Eleanor. He treated her with affection, caring for every detail of her life. He felt joy in her presence. In turn, Eleanor was touched by this care and attention, starting to feel comfort and happiness in the cave, despite the challenges she faced. However, she could not forget Jonathan. Her longing for him constantly haunted her, even as she tried to occupy herself with the task of caring for the ogre. She hoped that Jonathan was well and had found the happiness he deserved, but her heart was always tied to their shared memories and her love for him. Despite the changes in her life in the cave, her yearning for her first love was a source of nostalgia and sorrow, wishing to relive the moments spent with him. She wished to find a way back to his heart. Eleanor began to feel something strange moving within her. At first, she doubted it, but over time, it became clear that there was a change in her body. Her weakness increased, and she felt tired and exhausted, which worried the ogre, who felt a deep love for her like a daughter. He noticed Eleanor's condition deteriorating increasingly, and his concern for her grew. For the first time in the ogre's history, he broke his long slumber, which usually lasted a whole year. His love for Eleanor was so strong that he could not bear to see her decline before his eyes. He emerged from his slumber and began to devote all his time and attention to Eleanor. He conducted deep research in his ancient manuscripts and magical legends, trying to discover the cause of her weakness and seeking a cure. He also decided to communicate with other magical beings who might help him understand her condition. The ogre began to treat Eleanor with tenderness and love, delving into providing her with utmost comfort and care. He created a cozy environment in the cave, filled with medicinal herbs and items that could help restore her strength and health. As time passed, it became clear that Eleanor was carrying something within her. The ogre discovered this truth when he noticed the sudden physical changes in Eleanor. He did not expect her to be pregnant, but after a thorough examination, it was confirmed that she indeed was. This news was shocking to both Eleanor and the ogre. Initially, the ogre felt worried and fearful for Eleanor's and the baby's health. He didn't know how to handle this situation, especially since he had always lived in isolation from the outside world. Despite the doubts and worries, the ogre tried to be a strong support for Eleanor. He made every possible effort to ensure her comfort and safety. He prepared the cave better, gathered herbs and medicines that might help strengthen Eleanor's health and keep the pregnancy safe. Eleanor felt anticipation and anxiety about the future, but she was also grateful for the ogre's love and care. She hoped this pregnancy would be a sign of a new and happy beginning, despite the challenges they faced. As the pregnancy progressed, the cave turned into a place filled with hope and tenderness, with Eleanor and the ogre facing the challenges together, clinging to the hope that this child would be a sign of a new beginning and happiness in their lives. The months of pregnancy passed in the cave, and Eleanor felt the pangs of labor. The ogre had brought a forest fairy to assist her with her expertise. And the baby was born, as beautiful as the moon. The moment of birth was full of joy, as the little one filled the cave with happiness and light. The ogre was so happy that he considered the child a precious and rare gift. He took care of every detail, making the cave a warm and comfortable place for Eleanor and the baby. Meanwhile, Eleanor felt indescribable happiness, grateful for the new life that began through this child. However, there was always the painful question in her mind. What about Jonathan? Does he still remember her? Does he still hold any memory of her in his heart? And what happened to him after losing her? One day, while Eleanor was caring for her child, she decided to look for information about Jonathan. She used all possible means to communicate with the outside world. After a period of search and investigation, she learned from the dark fairies that Jonathan had regained his memory and returned to his life as Prince Alexander. While Jonathan was living his life as a prince, he had no recollection of Eleanor or the time they spent together. It seemed as if those memories had been completely erased from his mind, as if they had never existed. Despite the sadness Eleanor felt, her heart was filled with happiness for her child and her love for the ogre, who showed great tenderness and care. In the royal palace, King Henry decided to prepare his heir, Alexander, for marriage and chose a princess from the neighboring kingdom to be his bride. This marriage was one of the most significant events in the kingdom, attracting widespread interest among royalty and the populace. Preparations for the legendary wedding began in earnest. The halls were decorated with the most beautiful fabrics and flowers, and lavish meals were prepared for the guests. There was comprehensive organization for all aspects of the celebration, from the royal attire to musical performances and entertainment shows. The entire kingdom was excited and getting ready for this grand occasion. Meanwhile, Eleanor and her child were in the cave, far removed from all this activity. Although she felt nostalgic for the past and the beautiful memories she had with Jonathan, she focused on caring for her child and living peacefully with the ghoul. As the wedding day approached, the stark contrast between Eleanor's simple, tranquil life in the cave and Alexander's extravagant life in the palace became even more apparent. Eleanor hoped that her child would live a life filled with love and joy, even if it was far from the world of palaces and grand events. While the preparations continued, there was a feeling of contradiction between the two lives, but each embodied a different chapter in their lives. As the year Eleanor spent with the ogre came to an end, the ogre felt a deep sadness at the thought of parting from Eleanor and her child. This separation was particularly hard for him, especially after his love for Eleanor and her child had deepened. He loved her profoundly and considered her an essential part of his life. The ogre told Eleanor that she could now return to her previous life if she wished. He understood the attachment she felt towards Jonathan and wished her all the best in her new journey. He expressed his appreciation for her love and patience, assuring her that he would always be grateful for the time they had spent together. Eleanor was also deeply attached to the ogre, and parting from him caused her great sorrow. However, her love for Jonathan urged her to return, as she felt it was her duty to follow her heart and go back to the place where her journey began. After a long and emotional conversation, Eleanor made a difficult decision. Although she was very sad to leave the ogre, her love for Jonathan and the desire to know the fate of their previous lives compelled her to return. Eleanor bid farewell to the ogre with the warmest words and deepest feelings. Their final meeting was filled with tears. She told him that she would always visit and that she would not sever ties with him and the dark fairies. She left with a heavy heart, but was filled with hope that her return would mark a new beginning for everyone she had left behind. The beautiful Eleanor left the cave, carrying in her heart poignant memories and a profound experience of love and loyalty, heading towards a future whose details were unknown to her. Yet, she was determined to face whatever came her way with a strong faith in her ability to rebuild her life. When Eleanor arrived at the old cabin in the woods, she found her grandmother sitting by the fireplace, alone and sad. The grandmother began to cry tears of joy upon seeing her granddaughter, but the feelings of happiness were not without reproach. She expressed her sorrow over Eleanor's long absence and wished she had returned sooner. But the beautiful Eleanor embraced her elderly grandmother tenderly, explaining that she could not return until her mission was complete. She returned to her grandmother safe, carrying her beautiful son, who made the grandmother's heart melt with joy. The child was as handsome as his father, filling the cabin with love and delight. The beautiful Eleanor recounted her adventure to her grandmother, noting that everything that had happened to her felt like a miracle. She spoke of the ogre and his great love, how she gave birth to her son, and the emotions and challenges she faced. The grandmother felt astonished and joyful to hear the story, grateful that she had returned safely and brought the child with her. Eleanor said seriously, "Grandmother, I learned from the dark fairies that Prince Jonathan has returned to his kingdom. I must go to him to tell him of my return and our child." The grandmother felt worried about Eleanor's decision, but she also realized that her deep love for Jonathan made her determined to take this step. She said gently, "My dear, I understand your desire to tell Jonathan about your return and your child, but you must be careful. Traveling to the kingdom can be dangerous, especially after all you've been through." Eleanor affirmed her determination to go, adding that she at least wanted to inform Jonathan of what had happened, even if she could not return to him. Eleanor set off for Jonathan's kingdom, carrying mixed feelings of hope and fear in her heart, determined to find the prince and share the happy news. When Eleanor arrived at the palace, the lights illuminated the entrances festively, as if the kingdom was preparing for a grand wedding. She walked slowly, holding her child in her arms, her heart pounding with tension and hope. Eleanor asked the soldier guarding the gate about Prince Jonathan, but he delivered shocking news. Prince Jonathan recently married a princess from the neighboring kingdom, and the wedding will take place tomorrow. Eleanor froze for a moment, feelings of sadness and astonishment battling in her heart. How could this be? She had high hopes of finding Jonathan and telling him about their child, but now it seemed that things had changed suddenly. Eleanor tried to hold herself together as sorrow surged within her. How would she face this bitter reality? And where would this new discovery take her? Determined to confront the situation with dignity, no matter the pain she felt. Eleanor sat on the sidewalk, crying bitterly, overwhelmed by feelings of betrayal. She tried to find meaning in everything that had happened, having sacrificed everything for love. Suddenly, she felt a gentle voice whisper in her ear. It was the dark fairy who appeared suddenly, her faint glow illuminating around her. The fairy said in a calm voice, "I will help you reach the prince, Eleanor. Stay here and do not move. I will make him come to you." Eleanor had no choice but to follow the fairy's instructions, as hope filled her heart. She waited patiently and anxiously, determined to meet Jonathan no matter the difficulties. The fairy dared to go to the palace, driven by her determination to reunite Eleanor with the prince, while Eleanor watched anxiously everything happening around her. The fairy began to move the golden scepter to draw the prince's attention. As the royal scepter moved unusually, Prince Alexander was stunned by the scene. The scepter seemed to be moving with a hidden force, prompting him to follow it cautiously and in astonishment. When he reached where Eleanor was sitting under the tree, she had waited patiently, her heart beating with hope and fear. When she saw him, she rushed towards him and embraced him, despite the pain and sorrow she was enduring. She could not resist the feelings of longing that filled her heart. But Alexander pushed her away, rejecting her actions. He said sharply, "Who are you? What are you doing here? You seem to be a witch, and you have drawn me here using the magic of the scepter. Were you trying to steal it? This is a crime you will be punished for." Alexander turned to his soldiers and ordered them to seize Eleanor while she held her child, frightened and terrified, calling out to him with tears. "Jonathan, remember me. Remember I am Eleanor, your beloved Eleanor." But Alexander seemed deaf, as he did not respond to her calls. He did not know that the name Jonathan was merely a name she had given him, and that he had completely lost his memory. Eleanor thought he had betrayed her by returning to his kingdom, unaware that he did not remember her and knew nothing of his past life with her. Eleanor was captured and taken to an unknown place, while Alexander continued his life, ignoring the past he had completely lost. On the bright wedding morning, Prince Alexander was happy, celebrating with his wife, the princess, at a lavish wedding while everyone was immersed in joy and festivities. In contrast, Eleanor and her child were trapped in a dark place, the darkness of her sorrowful heart reflecting the pain she endured. She told the dark fairy, the ogre, everything that had happened, which ignited his fury. The ogre decided to rescue Eleanor and punish the prince. When he arrived at the palace, terror engulfed the place. The ogre began to smash everything in front of him, in a fit of rage. No one could confront him. When he saw Prince Alexander, the ogre approached him with fury. He lifted him with his massive hands and shouted, "How dare you imprison my little Eleanor, the one who was ready to sacrifice her heart for you, ungrateful beauty?" The ogre's anger was palpable, and the aftermath of his actions stirred chaos in the palace, as everyone tried to escape his powerful wrath. It was now clear that the wedding had turned into a scene of chaos and destruction, with the ogre posing a real threat to all around him. As Prince Alexander was in the ogre's grip, he couldn't comprehend what was happening around him. He seemed to be in a state of complete shock, having lost all memory of Eleanor or what he had done to her. Meanwhile, the dark fairy arrived carrying a bottle containing a magical elixir. She approached the ogre and handed him the elixir. The ogre insisted that the prince drink this elixir, no matter what. As soon as the prince consumed the elixir, something miraculous happened. His memory began to flow back, and his recollections returned one by one. It was as if he was awakening from a deep sleep, suddenly discovering everything. He remembered Eleanor. He remembered his love for her. A shiver ran through his body as he realized the magnitude of what he had lost and the injustice he had inflicted on his beloved. He was overwhelmed with guilt and sorrow for what he had done. In that moment, he resolved to do everything in his power to make amends and reclaim the love he had lost. When the ogre told Prince Alexander that he remembered nothing, the prince felt shock and disbelief. Gently, the ogre lowered him from his giant hand and began recounting the painful story that Eleanor had lived through to free him from the curse. He explained how Eleanor bravely went to the cave, offering her heart as a sacrifice to save him, and how she was forgotten in his life after he gained his freedom. Prince Alexander realized that his 25th birthday had passed uneventfully thanks to Eleanor's sacrifices. Suddenly, memories came rushing back, as if a cloud of forgetfulness had lifted. The courtiers were astonished. They had believed the prince was fated to die and were surprised by the return of the true love that had saved him. The prince immediately made his way to the prison where Eleanor and her child were being held. Upon seeing her, he fell to his knees before her, begging for forgiveness. His eyes were filled with tears and regret as he told her how sorry he was for everything that had happened, and how the loss of his memory had made him forget the love he once had for her. His voice trembled as he wished he could undo all the harm he had caused. At that poignant moment, The princess who was supposed to marry the prince stepped forward. With a voice full of humility and sincerity, she announced that she was not the rightful one to marry him. She affirmed that Eleanor, who had sacrificed everything for her love, was the one who deserved to be the prince's wife, especially after giving birth to his heir. The king was overjoyed upon hearing this news, elated by the return of his grandson and the introduction of the new child who would symbolize hope for the kingdom's future. The king decided to organize a grand celebration, with everyone gathering at the royal palace. As the wedding began, the palace was adorned with colors of joy and festivity. Music resounded, and laughter echoed throughout the halls, while the lights glittered around the grand ballroom, decorated in its finest attire. Prince Alexander stood beside Eleanor, who shone in a radiant white wedding gown, holding their child. Amid the festive atmosphere, Alexander gave an emotional speech at the wedding. He spoke of Eleanor's sacrifices that had saved him, and how true love had triumphed over all obstacles. His eyes were filled with love and devotion as he promised never to forget what she had done for them. With hearts full of joy, the king approached Eleanor, lauding her courage and patience, and affirming that the kingdom would be forever grateful to her. Alexander declared that he would rebuild the kingdom on the foundation of love and justice, and vowed to be a leader worthy of Eleanor's sacrifices. The celebration concluded with a legendary wedding party, where everyone danced under the silver moonlight, and soon the atmosphere returned to peace and tranquility. Eleanor and Alexander, having reunited after countless hardships and sacrifices, enjoyed a quiet and beautiful night under the starry sky, wrapped in their love and new dreams. Over time, the prince and queen became symbols of true and faithful love. The child grew up in an atmosphere of love and care, and the family lived in happiness and harmony. Eleanor and Alexander's story, which began with a tremendous sacrifice, remained as proof that true love can overcome any obstacle and fulfill the heart's deepest dreams. The ogre continued to visit the palace that had become Eleanor and her child's home. Though the ogre had returned to his solitude, he regularly visited them, caring for and protecting them from any threats. Thanks to his vigilance, they lived in safety and peace. His visits were always filled with tenderness and attention, making Eleanor feel the presence of a loyal friend, and she felt deep happiness surrounded by the love of those who cherished her. The ogre's visits were not limited to checking on Eleanor and her child. He also became a loyal ally to the queen. Thanks to his magical strength and extensive experience, the ogre became a strong support for the queen against any threats or aggression they faced. The ogre's collaboration with the queen brought unprecedented strength and protection to the kingdom. Thus, his presence in Eleanor and her child's life was a source of safety and peace, and he added a powerful defensive force to the kingdom, contributing to the overall stability and prosperity of the realm. And so, they all lived happily ever after, with love and harmony.